Grandma, you must be used to cold food by now, right? That single question, spoken from the mouth of my 5-year-old grandson, pierced my heart like a shard of ice. He had said it so innocently, so guilelessly, in front of all our assembled relatives. The chopsticks in my hand trembled, just for a moment. Before me, the dining table was a magnificent canvas of color and aroma. There was a beautiful fillet of salmon, grilled until the skin was crisp and the flesh flaked perfectly. A thick-cut ribeye steak, marbled with rich fat, sat beside a platter of roasted root vegetables glistening with herbs. There were elaborate side dishes, colorful salads, and a dozen small appetizers arranged with painstaking care. It was a feast, a true celebration. And yet, all I could hear was his question, echoing in the space between the cheerful chatter. For the past 6 months, I had been living in my son's house. Every day, the meal I was served was the same: a small bowl of plain white rice and a side of pickled vegetables. Sometimes, if I was lucky, there would be a cup of instant soup. I could not recall a single time I had tasted fish or meat in that house. Morning, noon, and night, I would sit at the small table in my room, silently accepting what was given to me with a grateful heart. "You're old, Mom. This is more than enough for you," my daughter-in-law had told me once. When she said it, all I could do was nod. This is what it means to grow old, I told myself. This is just the way things are now. I tried to make my peace with it. But today, this meal was different. With relatives visiting, a splendid dinner had been prepared, and it was in the middle of this bounty that my grandson, Leo, with the unfiltered honesty of a child, had spoken those words. "You must be used to cold food by now, right?" I couldn't form a reply. I could only manage the shape of a smile, forcing my lips to curve upwards as I lowered my gaze to the plate in front of me. But inside, a scream was tearing through my soul. For Leo to say such a thing, it meant only one thing. It meant that someone had told him. Someone had explained to him that Grandma always eats cold food. He knew it because he had heard it, because it was a fact of our daily life. It was our routine. It meant that even though I lived under the same roof, I was treated as if I were invisible. An unseen presence. A ghost at their table. The sounds of my family laughing and talking around the beautiful dining table seemed to fade, as if coming from a great distance. I couldn't join in. I couldn't bring myself to smile a real smile. I could feel the hand clutching my chopsticks, trembling with a weakness that spread through my entire body. They say children speak the truth without varnish or decoration. That is why his innocent question was the cruelest, most honest thing I had ever heard. A hot pressure began to build behind my eyes, but I couldn't cry. I absolutely could not cry. If I started crying, they would just think, "See? She's such a difficult person." I would become even more of a burden. So I took a quiet sip of my tea, kept the brittle smile plastered on my face, and closed the door to my heart. My name is Evelyn Miller, and I am 75 years old. I was born and raised in Chicago. And I dedicated my entire life to my craft as a master seamstress. I specialized in creating bespoke gowns, one-of-a-kind pieces tailored by hand, a skill passed down through generations. My hands knew the language of fabric and thread better than any other. I lost my husband Robert to cancer when I was 58. From that day on, my life revolved around two things: raising our young son Michael, and pouring my heart into the work at my small studio. Those days were my everything. Time passed. The day Michael was accepted into MIT, to study engineering on the other side of the country, my heart swelled with a pride so immense it felt like it would burst. He moved to Boston, and I remember him squeezing my work-worn hand before he left. "You can do this, Mom," I had told him. The warmth of his grip in mine is a memory I still hold as clearly as if it were yesterday. I didn't want my son to struggle. I didn't want him to carry the weight of financial worry. So, I dipped into my savings, month after month, and sent him what I could to help with his tuition and living expenses. In those years, watching him succeed, I think I felt the pride of being a parent for the very first time. And then, I reached retirement age. At 65, I made a decision. I sold the small Chicago studio where I had spent a lifetime, the place that held so many memories of Robert and our life together. With newfound freedom and time on my hands, there was only one thing I truly wanted: to be near Michael's family, to live a quiet life where I could see my grandson's face every day. That's why I thought to myself, with such pure and simple hope, I don't need money anymore. All I need is a seat at their table and the sound of their laughter. It has been 6 months since I moved to the suburbs of New Jersey to live with them. In the beginning, I felt a profound sense of happiness. I would wake up early every morning, make a simple soup for the family's breakfast, pack a small lunch for my grandson, and walk him to his preschool. Michael was busy with his engineering job, often working late into the evening, but on the weekends, the three of them, Michael, his wife Sarah, and little Leo, would sometimes go to the park. Leo would get an ice cream cone and insist, "For Grandma too!" And watching his bright, smiling face as he shared with me would fill my chest with a gentle, glowing warmth. However, small, subtle changes in our daily life began to create tiny ripples of anxiety in my heart. At first, it was the food. The variety of dishes on the table, or at least on the tray brought to my room, began to shrink. There used to be small portions of beef stew or a piece of baked fish. Now, it was almost always just vegetables, simple and plain. One evening, Leo picked up a green bean and said quietly, "Grandma, I want to eat real fish again soon." His innocent words felt like a needle in my chest. "It's for Leo's health, Sarah," my daughter-in-law would explain, but her tone felt distant, almost dismissive. I couldn't help but harbor an unkind thought. Is she unhappy with me? Does she resent my being here? I asked myself these questions over and over again. Then, other things started happening. During a meal, Leo might say, "Grandma's food smells different from ours." When Michael was on the phone, he would abruptly cut his conversation short if I entered the room, saying, "Look, I'm busy, I'll call you back." He was conscious of my presence, and it made him censor himself. I would reach out a hand, wanting to join the conversation, but an awkward, unwelcoming silence would descend, and I would swallow my words. More and more, I found myself retreating to the solitude of my room in the attic. Still, the desire to be accepted, to be seen as a member of the family, never faded. After losing Robert, this small circle of people was the only family I had left in the world. As long as I could hear laughter in this house, as long as my grandson would say, "I want to be with Grandma," I believed my presence here had meaning. One evening, as I was making myself a cup of tea, my eyes fell upon an old photograph. It was of Michael and me at his wedding, with my late husband Robert, standing proudly beside us, all three of us beaming. How happy we were back then. "I wonder if we'll ever get those smiles back," I whispered quietly to myself. Just then, I heard a burst of laughter from the next room. It was Leo and Sarah playing a game together, their voices full of joy. Hearing that sound soothed my aching heart, if only for a moment. This sound is enough, I told myself. Yes, even if I am always in the shadows, hearing them happy is enough. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would continue to live here in silence. I would not offer my opinions or interfere. I would simply show my love through my actions, through the quiet work of my hands. I began to police myself constantly, afraid that saying the wrong thing, even with the best intentions, would disrupt the fragile peace of their home. My Robert passed away 17 years ago in the autumn. I was in our old house in Chicago, at my sewing machine as usual. He was in bed, weakened by his illness, and he watched me work. In a voice that was barely a whisper, he said to me, "Evelyn, don't you overdo it. When the work gets to be too much for you, I want you to go to Michael's. Go live with him. Make sure that grandson of yours sees your face. A mother like you, a grandson needs that too." His words have stayed with me, etched into my heart, ever since. Robert was a man of few words, a craftsman like myself. He was not one for grand displays of affection, and when we were young, we often clashed. But in his later years, he took to holding my hand as he fell asleep at night. During the final months of his illness, I scaled back my work to care for him full time. The very last thing he ever said to me was, "From now on, you take care of yourself." I've made sure you'll be able to live a comfortable life at Michael's place." He gently squeezed my hand, a faint smile on his lips, and then he quietly slipped away. At that moment, I made a promise to him and to myself. I will fulfill the peaceful old age you wanted for me. I will find it in Michael's home, surrounded by our grandson's smiles and guided by your last wish. My decision to move to New Jersey was, in many ways, an act of keeping that promise to Robert. I wasn't looking for luxury. I simply wanted time with my family, a continuation of the life that Robert and I had built together. That was what I believed. It had been about a month since I, at 75 years old, had moved into my son and daughter-in-law's home in a small townhouse community in New Jersey. The years of meticulous handiwork had taken their toll, and my hands were no longer nimble enough for the fine stitching my craft demanded. I had given up my sewing machine, but the joy of seeing my grandson's face every day was a happiness I had never known before. However, it was during that first month that a subtle sense of unease began to sprout in my chest. "Your room is up in the attic, Mom. You can have some peace and quiet up there," Sarah had said with a polite smile on the day I moved in. The room itself was fine. It was quiet, and it got good sunlight. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was intentionally set apart, distant from the heart of the family. That first week, when dinner time came, I made my way to the living room, expecting to sit at the table with them. But Sarah stopped me with another gentle smile. "Oh, Mom, you must be exhausted from the move. Why don't you eat in your room tonight? I've prepared a separate meal for you on a tray, so you don't have to worry about a thing." She handed me a small tray with a few home-cooked dishes on it. They looked warm and delicious, but when I glanced at the dining table, I saw a much grander meal being set out for Michael, Sarah, and Leo. At that moment, an indescribable emptiness tightened its grip around my heart. The next morning, I went to the kitchen, determined to be useful. "Good morning," I said. "If you'd like, I could help you prepare breakfast." Sarah shook her head lightly. "That's very kind of you, Mom, but no thank you. We're really used to my way of cooking. Please, just rest and relax." Her words were polite, there was no sharp edge to them. But I started to feel as though I wasn't family, but a guest, a long-term visitor in their home. A few weeks later, an old friend from Chicago was supposed to be in the area, and had arranged to stop by for a visit. I was so excited. I went out and bought some pastries from a local bakery and waited. But when I rang the doorbell at the agreed-upon time, there was no answer. I stood on the front step for what felt like an eternity. After about 10 minutes, Michael finally opened the door. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Something came up unexpectedly and we can't have company today." "I'm really sorry. Why hadn't they just told me? Why was I left standing outside my own son's home?" In that instant, a heavy weight settled deep in my chest. Was the old me no longer needed? I remembered a time when I would chat with the other mothers at Michael's school, bringing my famous homemade cinnamon rolls to bake sales and packing special lunches for his field trips. I remembered Leo's delighted face just a year ago, exclaiming, "Grandma's cinnamon rolls are the best." But now, I was terrified that those very things, the skills and gestures that had once defined my role as a mother and grandmother, were now considered old-fashioned and unwelcome. I feared that their new way of doing things had superseded everything, and that my very presence was an inconvenience. This anxiety grew day by day, a creeping vine that I could no longer control. My mind would race with anxious thoughts. Do I even have a right to be here? It's so quiet all day. It's like I'm living all alone in an empty house. Die, yes. But I came here for Leo. I thought just being able to see him would be enough. That night, I lay curled up in my bed, the tears I had held back for so long finally streaming down my face. A tangled mess of regret, loneliness, love, and fear was squeezing my heart. It was then that I began to understand that I was not living here as a member of the family, but as an outsider, and with that heavy realization, I began to wonder what my next step should be. The small feelings of unease were slowly, painfully, solidifying into a certainty. Was it right for me to stay here any longer? 6 months had passed since I moved in. It was a Saturday, and something I had vaguely noticed before suddenly clicked into sharp focus. On the weekends, the most wonderful smells come from the kitchen, but my food is always the same. That morning, just like every other morning, a tray had been placed outside my attic room door. On it was a bowl of plain white rice and a small dish of pickles. Just pickles and a thin, watery broth. There was nothing luxurious about it. Its only saving grace was that it was warm. That afternoon, my grandson Leo came to my attic room, creeping quietly up the stairs. He leaned in close and whispered, his breath warm against my cheek. "Grammy," he said, his voice a conspiratorial hiss, "we're having prime rib tonight." "A big one?" But Mommy said, she said, "Grandma's fine with her usual meal." His words were gentle, spoken with the simple honesty of a child, but they pierced my chest like a knife. It was only when we had relatives over, when guests filled the house with chatter and laughter, that a magnificent spread was laid out on the dining room table. In those moments, I was expected to sit with them, to play the part. We're a real family after all, the unspoken script demanded. We all eat together. The contradiction of it all, the chasm between the performance and the reality, was tearing my heart to pieces. To chew on my sadness, to let it sink deep into my bones. I waited until the house was quiet that night. Then, in the solitude of my attic room, I took out my small diary with a trembling hand. The pen felt heavy, foreign. "Saturday," I wrote. "For lunch, a bowl of plain rice, some pickles, and a cup of broth. No one came up to speak with me." After writing those few, stark words, I set the pen down. Wiping a tear from my cheek with the back of my hand, I whispered the question that had been haunting me for months into the silent, dusty air. Am I not family here? Am I not one of them? The next morning brought a fresh, and perhaps deeper, wound. The door to the dining room had been left slightly ajar, and as I passed by on my way down the stairs, I could see inside. There, on the table, were the glorious leftovers from the night before, thick slices of prime rib, a platter of shrimp cocktail, a beautiful baked salmon with lemon and herbs. It looked like the remnants of a banquet. But my tray, the simple tray that was usually left for me at the bottom of the stairs, was nowhere to be seen. That small sliver of a view through the crack in the door told me everything I needed to know. It was a silent, screaming confirmation of the truth. I had been deliberately excluded. My heart thrashed inside my chest like a trapped bird. I helped them buy this house, I thought. The memory of signing over a significant portion of my life's savings. A bitter taste in my mouth. I put in the time, the effort, the love, for what? For this. A wave of shame washed over me. For my own grandson to see me treated this way, to know that his grandmother is set apart. But I couldn't say the words out loud. I couldn't confront them. All I could do was turn around, retreat back to the silence of my room, and cry. And in the depths of that sorrow, I made a decision. I didn't go down to the dining room. I avoided the rich, savory smell of the leftover beef that wafted up the stairs. Instead, I went down the back staircase directly into the kitchen. I took a sharp knife from the block and began to chop vegetables, more carefully and precisely than I had in months. With each rhythmic slice of the blade against the cutting board, I whispered to myself, a mantra against the pain. I am still here. I am here. The steady rhythm of the knife was calming, a small anchor in the storm of my emotions. But underneath, the deep, profound sadness remained, a cold, heavy stone in my gut. That evening, I wrote a letter. My hand shook so badly that the words were jagged and uneven, and my tears smudged the ink as I wrote. "Please," I wrote, "don't forget about me. Just remember me as your grandmother." I folded the paper, sealed it in an envelope, and tucked it away. I would find a way to give it to them tomorrow. A few days later, Leo appeared at my door again, unannounced. He was holding a small, quilted drawstring pouch in his hands, one that I had sewn for him years ago to hold his favorite marbles. "Grammy, look," he said, his face bright with pride. "I still have it. I keep it safe. You made it for me, right? You wrapped up my marbles in it." His words, his simple act of remembering, were a balm to my aching soul. In that moment, I felt it with a certainty that had been missing for so long. I was needed here. I had been a necessary part of his world. And yet, even with that small comfort, the larger question I kept asking myself, the question of whether or not I was truly family, remained unanswered. And so, my small, quiet acts of resistance continued. They were leading, I now realize, to what came next. One afternoon, the smell of broiled fish wafted up from the kitchen, and for a moment, I froze on the landing. It was a familiar, comforting aroma that reminded me of home, of Chicago. But I didn't go down. As had become my routine, I turned and went back to my room, where I quietly ate the bowl of white rice and pickles that had been left for me. "I'm used to it now," I told myself, a silent monologue that no one else could hear. "I don't need a feast. I'm fine." My mind drifted back to my own childhood. Times had been tight after the war, and I remembered my mother, her face etched with worry, finding creative ways to make a meal out of almost nothing. There were days when a simple potato soup felt like a banquet. She taught me that a full heart was more important than a full stomach. And so I tried to believe that now. This is enough, I'd reason with myself. Even if my stomach isn't full, seeing my grandson's smile is enough to fill my heart. Believing this, I would often set aside a small piece of my own meager portion, a pickled plum or a slice of radish, hoping to give it to Leo later. But a small, insidious doubt was beginning to grow in the back of my mind. Is this really a choice I'm making? Or is it simply that I'm not being seen at all? My daughter-in-law Sarah always smiled her placid, gentle smile, but the time she spent making eye contact with me grew shorter each day. She no longer allowed me in the kitchen. "The way we do things now is just different, Mom," she would say, her voice soft but firm, effectively blocking my path. "Your old ways would just be inconvenient." At first, I had thought it was a gesture of respect, that she didn't want to burden me. But now, with every single meal being prepared and served separately, I began to feel the presence of a wall between us. Thin and invisible but utterly impenetrable. Am I just a boarder here? I would ask myself, placing a hand over my chest. And all I could feel in response was a cold, hollow silence. That evening, as I descended the stairs, I felt a heavy, constricting weight in my chest. "I have to thank them properly tonight," I whispered to myself, rehearsing the words. We were having guests, distant relatives from back home in Chicago, whom Michael had been meaning to invite for months. Today was the day, and somewhere deep inside me, a tiny, foolish flicker of hope had ignited. Maybe tonight will be different. The aroma drifting from the kitchen was intoxicating. Salmon, crab, clams, a rich seafood feast. How wonderful, I murmured, surprised by the sudden, rapid beating of my own heart. "Mom, please, come have a seat," Michael and Sarah said together, guiding me towards the dining table. They pulled out a chair for me. It was the first time in 5 months I had been invited to sit with them for a proper meal, finally. A plate was set before me, a beautiful, ornate dish laden with wonders. There was shrimp cocktail, baked fish in a wine sauce, and even a perfectly grilled piece of salmon with a miso glaze. I gently clasped my hands together, closed my eyes, and offered a silent prayer of thanks. The first bite was an explosion of warmth and flavor, a profound, forgotten happiness that spread through my entire body. "It's delicious, isn't it, Mom?" Michael asked, his voice kind. "How is it?" I could only nod, my mouth full, and managed to say, "It's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful." It was in that moment that Leo, my 5-year-old grandson, his face beaming, pointed his fork at my plate and shouted with glee, "Look, Grandma! That's the same food Mommy and Daddy are eating." The air at the table instantly froze. The cheerful chatter ceased. Every face, including those of our relatives, hardened into a mask of awkward shock. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I felt my lips begin to tremble, and a sudden chill swept through me. As if my body temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a single second. The same food, I heard myself echo, the words barely a whisper. Michael's face flushed a deep red. He shot a quick, sharp glance at his wife. Sarah looked away, her gaze fixed on her plate, saying nothing. In that one shattering instant, I understood. Oh, this isn't just the same food. This is a performance. This is for show.you. Yes. Yes, it is, sweetie, I managed to reply, but my voice was small and tight. A swirling vortex of guilt, shame, and a terrible, clarifying sorrow churned in my stomach. Something had broken. Or rather, the thing that had been separating me from them all along had, finally been laid bare for everyone to see. Thank you for dinner, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake inside me. I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. No one tried to stop me. No one said a word. I don't know if what I felt was relief or devastation, or some unbearable mixture of both. All I knew was that I had to disappear. From the hallway window, I could see the world outside. A cold March rain was falling, slicking the pavement and making the streetlights shimmer. I realized I didn't have an umbrella, but it didn't matter. I walked home through the drizzle, letting the cold rain soak through my coat. Back in my attic room, I silently pulled a suitcase from the back of the closet. I began to pack. The nice dress I had brought for special occasions. The sweater Robert had bought me all those years ago. My toiletries. Why am I even here? I asked the empty room, but my own voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. The television was on, a news program flickering in the corner, but the words were just noise. They didn't penetrate the fog in my head. A terrible thought began to form, a thought that felt truer than anything else. Michael and Sarah wished I wasn't real. They wished their obligation to me, the very fact of my existence, would simply vanish. As the night wore on, I couldn't stop my hands from packing, folding, and arranging the few belongings I had. It was over. Today, everything was finally over. A cold numbness spread through my body, chasing away the last of the warmth from the meal. Lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. Leo's innocent words played over and over in my mind, a relentless refrain. For my daughter-in-law's sake, for the family's sake, God and I fire and accuse and detestive. I had told myself these things for months, using them as a shield. But behind those words was the excruciating pain of realizing that everything I had dedicated my life to, all the love I had poured into my family, had been trampled on and discarded. Was I truly an unnecessary person in this house? I lay awake until the first pale light of dawn crept through the window. My suitcase was packed. As the sky turned from gray to pink, my resolve hardened. I'm going home, I decided. Back to Chicago. That night, after the guests had left and the house had fallen silent, I came out of the small bathroom and found myself wiping down the last of the clean dishes in the kitchen. I was lost in my own thoughts, asking myself the same question for the 1,000th time. Am I just in the way here? Have I become a burden? Just as the thought crossed my mind, a voice came from behind me, making me jump. It was Michael, standing quietly in the doorway. Mom! I turned, surprised. His eyes were shining with unshed tears, and his voice trembled when he spoke. Mom, I'm so sorry. If we did something wrong, are we making you unhappy? His voice cracked on the last word. Or, do you feel like you're a burden to us? I stopped wiping the plate, my hand frozen in midair. His question felt like a physical blow, and it took my breath away. I couldn't answer him right away. I couldn't find the words. Michael just stood there, his head bowed, waiting. His question pierced straight through me. A burden? All I ever wanted was to make rice for my grandson, to help him with his bath, to be a small part of their lives. That was all. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I tiptoed from my room and left a single envelope on the dining room table. Inside was my Social Security check for the month. On the front, I had written a short, simple note with a shaking hand. Here is my check for the month. Please use it all for Leo. I see now that my being here is a burden. Please take care of yourselves. I placed it gently on the polished wood, my hand hovering over it for a moment before I pulled away. My mind flew back through the years, back to our old house in Chicago. I remembered our kitchen, a place that was always filled with laughter. When my husband, Robert, was still alive, we had a tradition on weekends. The three of us, Robert, a young Michael, and me, would cook together. "All right, Robert, you're on soup duty today," I'd say. "Grandma, I'll crack the eggs," Michael would shout, his face alight with excitement. The meals we made together were often messy and imperfect, but the table was always warm, the food filled with love. Our small kitchen was the heart of our home. I can still see Michael standing on a stool, wearing one of my oversized aprons, his eyes watering as he tried to peel an onion, a huge grin on his face. Back then, I never thought about being a perfect mother or having a perfect house. I just knew, instinctively, how precious it was for a family to share time together, to gather around the same pot and say, "This is delicious. Mom, your beef stew is the best in the world," Michael used to say, holding out his bowl for a second helping. That smile was all I ever needed. I didn't need money or a fancy title. That was enough. And now, "Mom, please don't come in the kitchen. Our way of doing things is different." That single sentence made me feel like an outdated appliance, a relic whose existence was an inconvenience. My heart had a raw, scraped-out feeling that never seemed to heal. I wasn't expecting luxury. I just wanted a small space to exist, the simple warmth of sharing a table with the people I loved. That old kitchen in Chicago, the sturdy maple cutting board, worn smooth by years of use, the finicky gas stovetop Robert was always tinkering with, the heavy cast-iron skillet where Michael burned his first scrambled eggs. That place wasn't just a room. It was my family. I realize now that I had been carrying the warmth of that memory in my heart all this time. Perhaps that's why the silence of this house, the coldness of this new life, felt so crushingly heavy. The next morning, I left the house before anyone was awake. As I stepped out of the apartment building and onto the quiet suburban street, the normal sounds of life starting, a car engine, a distant dog barking made me feel like a ghost. It was as if I had never existed there at all. On the Amtrak train back to Chicago, the tears finally came, and they wouldn't stop. But through the blur, I could feel a tiny, resilient flicker of light in my chest. A few days after I returned to my old, quiet house, the phone rang. It was an old friend. "Evelyn, honey, are you all right? I heard what happened." My voice trembled as I answered, "Yes, I'm home now. It was a quiet trip." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then my friend continued, her voice hesitant. "Listen, Evelyn, I heard that your Michael, he was at a dinner party a while back, and he told someone, he apparently boasted, 'We don't really need my mom's old-fashioned cooking anymore.'" That single sentence. And with that, a new kind of pain pierced my heart. But at the same time, I had a realization. I wasn't hated, I simply didn't fit into their ideal picture of a family. It was possible that my very presence in their home was an extra, inconvenient piece that spoiled the composition they were trying to create for the world. But that was all right. The sorrow was real. My son's question, "Are you a burden to us?" had struck me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me weak and shattered, as only a mother can be. The betrayal of love was sharp. Thinking of the years of affection I had poured into my family, a deep sadness tore through my chest. But there was a flicker of hope. I refused to deny my own worth. And I wanted to believe in the future of my grandson. On the morning of that day, I quietly packed my last few belongings and boarded an Amtrak train bound for Chicago. The spring air still held the bite of winter, and yet, a strange and profound sense of peace had settled over my heart. After I returned to Chicago, I went to see my old tailor shop. The windows were clouded with a thick layer of dust, and the sign had faded, its letters weathered and pale, but I could still feel a part of my life lingering there, held within its walls. I'll start again, right here. Having made my decision, a few days later I hung a new, freshly painted sign that read, Evelyn's Heartfelt Stitches, and reopened the shop. Neighbors passing by on the street would stop and call out to me. "We're so happy to have you back," one would say. Another asked, "You know, I still have that old prom dress you made for me. Do you think you could alter it?" Old students I had taught in community sewing classes came to visit too. One woman, her eyes welling with tears, told me, "I still remember the first communion dress you made for me when I was just a little girl." A young man said, "Miss Evelyn, you have the same kind smile you've always had. Every time I took a needle and thread in my hands, a warmth spread through my chest." Each night, I would write in my small diary, "Today's customer was a student from 20 years ago. She brought in her mother's funeral dress to be altered." I worked quietly, my hands moving with a sense of gratitude. Those 6 months in that house, with no one to speak to and eating cold meals all by myself, I came to realize, with a deep and quiet understanding, that even those days were now nourishment for the peace I felt today. It was about a month later when a small cardboard box arrived. The return address was from New Jersey. It was from him. When I opened the seal, I found it filled with colorful, folded paper animals, and tucked inside was a small, handwritten letter. "Dear Grandma, I want to bake cookies with you again. Eating dinner by myself is no fun. I love you, Grandma." Without thinking, I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. His voice, his smile, the warmth of his small body, it all came rushing back to me in a single, overwhelming wave. After a little while, I packed a small lunchbox with some of his favorite treats and mailed it back. To him, along with a reply, "Grandma is baking cookies every day too. Do you remember the star-shaped cutter? Let's use it together again soon." That night, I took out a bolt of beautiful fabric I had been saving for years. I decided I would sew just one thing for him, a special quilt. The pattern was of stars and crescent moons. It felt just right for the coming season of his life. I thought to myself, even if I have been rejected as a mother, as long as I am Grandma, there are still things I can do for him. And if our hearts can connect, even just a little, then that is enough. When I opened that small package from my grandson, I felt something deep inside my chest, finally, gently, come undone. "Grandma, I want to bake cookies with you again." I couldn't take my eyes off that one sentence, written in a child's unsteady hand. I could feel the tension that had been gripping my heart for so long begin to soften, as if it were being held in a gentle embrace. I can still be someone's important person. That simple fact was enough to make the tears overflow. Later that night, alone in the quiet of my room, I found myself thinking back on what had happened in that house. My grandson's father, my son Michael, was never a cold-hearted child. I remembered when he was little, and I had the flu. He had brought me a glass of water in the middle of the night, his small hands trembling as he carried it. When he went off to college, he called me countless times, crying because he was having trouble adjusting to life in Boston. How did that boy learn to treat his own mother with such coldness? I'm sure that, in his own way, he was trying to maintain some kind of balance within the framework of his family. Perhaps he wanted to avoid friction with his wife, and my being there was a source of that tension. Caught between his mother's feelings and the peace of his home, I imagine he must have been suffering. When I thought of it that way, I felt like I understood, just a little, the meaning behind the silence I had seen in his weary posture. Perhaps, deep in his heart, he felt the same sense of not belonging that I did. And because of that, I decided I would stop blaming him. Instead of living imprisoned by the past, I would be grateful for the small kindnesses that existed now, and I would nurture that tiny spark of light. Perhaps that was the last role I had to play as a parent. I did not attend my grandson's first birthday party. The sky was overcast that morning, and for some reason, a quiet ache settled deep in my chest. Watching my grandson grow is the greatest joy of my life. But there was a part of me that thought, there is no longer a place for me at that table. Instead, I went to his preschool's holiday pageant, quietly, without telling a soul, as I slipped into a chair in the back corner of the auditorium and held the program in my hands. My heart felt full to bursting. I just wanted to see my boy on that stage. That was my only wish right now. Then, the music started, and my grandson appeared in the center of the stage, his small body moving with all his might as he danced. Tears streamed down my cheeks without my even noticing. It was for this child's smile that I went to that house. It was for this child's future that I had endured everything. When the dance was over, the parents applauded and rushed toward their children. I stood up, intending to slip away quietly, but just then, I heard a voice behind me call out, "Mom!" I turned around, and there stood Michael's wife, Sarah. She bowed her head, deeply, so deeply. "Mom, I was wrong." Her voice was trembling. Her shoulders were shaking too. Beside her stood my son, Michael. He said nothing, but he reached out and took my hand. His hand felt just as it did that day in the kitchen when he was a little boy, helping me carry the dishes. Even as an adult, it was somehow still a little clumsy. But it was warm, and it was strong. There were no words, but the firm grip of his hand seemed to say everything. "I want us to start over, as a family." That is what I felt it was communicating. I nodded and I said just one thing: "Let's have dinner together." In that exact moment, my grandson ran to me shouting, "Grandma!" and threw his arms around my waist, hugging me tight. I realized all over again that his warmth was the most precious thing in the world. I swear to God, I don't need to be special. I don't need to be thanked. Just to be able to sit around the same table as family, to laugh together, that alone is enough to save me. She lifted her face, her eyes filled with tears, and spoke quietly. "Mom, I am so sorry. I was just so overwhelmed by the pressure. Being a mother, keeping the house, my husband's work events, I felt like I was failing at everything. And I ended up taking it out on you, the person closest to me." I couldn't say anything. I just looked into her eyes. "It wasn't your fault at all. I got so caught up in the idea that I had to be perfect that I lost all my perspective," she continued, her voice shaking. "But when Leo said, 'I'm lonely without Grandma,' I finally understood. I realized that I hadn't been seeing you at all. You, who were always so kind, who endured everything in silence." And then, she bowed her head deeply once more. "From now on, I promise I will never, ever let this happen again. I will make our house a place where I can truly say, 'Welcome home' to you. A place where you can genuinely smile. Please, let us welcome you as family. For real this time." The moment I heard those words, I felt something that had been weighing on my heart for so long simply melt away. At that moment, my son Michael said nothing at all. He just looked me in the eye, his lips pressed into a thin line, and he bowed his head again and again, deeply. I squeezed his hand. In response, his hand tightened around mine, enveloping it completely. He was trembling. He didn't say it in words, but I could feel the countless emotions contained within that silence. "I'm sorry." He must have wanted to say it, but the words wouldn't come. As a father, a husband, and a son, the number of things he had to protect had grown, and somewhere along the way, he had pushed his own mother away. But in his eyes at that moment, I could clearly see regret, and I could see warmth. That alone was enough to save me. Perhaps family isn't about words. Perhaps it's something that connects people through the heart, just like this. A long time ago, my husband Robert said to me, "The warmth of a family is born at the dinner table. If your hearts are connected there, you can overcome any hardship." Now, I understand the meaning of those words deep in my bones. As people get older, it's natural to want to be respected, to be thanked. But that wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted to be a family that could gather around the same pot of stew, talking about today and tomorrow. That was all. After everything that happened, there is no longer any anger or resentment left in my heart. There is only a quiet gratitude and a gentle warmth that fills my chest. No one is perfect. Sometimes we lose our way, sometimes we hurt each other, and sometimes we are too late to fix our mistakes. Perhaps that is what it means to be a family, and so I will forgive them, and I will quietly look forward to the day we can all sit at the same table again. Family isn't just about living together. It's about sharing a meal together with all your heart. That is what I believe. Perhaps, among all of you listening, there is someone who is bound by the image of a perfect family, someone who is on the verge of losing sight of the people who truly matter. Perhaps someone is pretending not to notice that a person in their own home has become more distant than a guest. If that's the case, please try to remember. Remember the preciousness of sharing a warm meal together. Remember that its warmth can become the light that sustains you through life. If today's story lit a small candle in your heart, please let me know in the comments. Even if it's simple, I want to share a table with my parents. Your one comment might just be the thing that saves someone. And I will continue to share stories about seniors and families, so I would be grateful if you would follow this channel. Together, let's spread a circle of kindness. Thank you for listening.